All right, let's go ahead and continue our discussion of Audience Builder with defining segments. So previously, we've discussed how to define an audience and exclude members of that audience. The next piece here is really defining a segment. So a segment is essentially a group of contacts that falls within the audience, but they meet additional criteria that we're going to define there under the Segments tab. So if we look here at this pie chart, we have all of our loyalty customers. So our loyalty customers is going to be our audience. Within that, we have the segments for platinum, gold, silver, and then the remainder who maybe they haven't achieved a loyalty status yet. Right? So how do we build that in Audience Builder? Well, under the Segments tab, we're going to be able to use that attribute library like what we were using previously to be able to drag in all of our criteria. Then we're going to be able to set the priority of those. And priority is a very important thing because it essentially works like a waterfall. If we have criteria that one person could meet two different statements, then they are going to fall into the grouping that appears first according to the priority list. So when we get into the tool, you'll see that you could shuffle those around potentially, and those numbers may change depending on what the criteria are and if it's possible to have one person fall into two different groupings. Okay. So when we get into the segment tab, and as we start defining a segment, we're going to notice that there are two separate tabs within there. There's the segment criteria tab where we're going to be able to essentially set our filter criteria, and we can name that grouping. Then there's the advanced options tab where we can give a segment code, and we'll see what the segment code is for here in just a moment. But we can also limit the size of the segment as well. So we can set that by a number of contacts. We can also set that to a percentage. Okay. It's also through the advanced options tab where we can create a segment template. So segment templates are for using frequently used segments across audiences. So you saw something similar when we saw the exclusion templates in the previous video in this series. So segment templates allow us to drag from the sidebar onto the canvas. We can also filter for those based on whether they are templates that we created versus all of the templates defined in our account. We can also sort by name, by count, or ascending or descending. So when we're talking about capping some segments, what that really means is that we are going to have the ability to constrain the results that come back from our segment. So even if we have 5,000 people who meet our segment criteria, we could say, hey, let's cap that to a segment size of 80. And it's just simply going to take that first percentage or number. It's not going to be random. It's going to be randomly selected through there. It's not going to come in the same sequence of which they meet the criteria as it's going through the database. All right, so I mentioned a moment ago that segment code was going to come into play. So for those customers who are using Discover, what that allows for you to do is to include that in a report in Discover so that way we can get essentially some segment reporting based on the behavior that segment had with emails. So otherwise, it's not really going to be as relevant within the application, but certainly for many of our customers, they purchase Audience Builder with Discover reports. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the tool then. And as we jump in here, so you'll notice here under all segments, I don't have any at the moment. One thing I do want to show here is that there's this running totals option off to the side, and you'll see me toggle that as we build our segments out. So to go ahead and create a segment, I'm going to come here to new segment. And as I create this, everyone who's in this new segment already had to meet my audience criteria. I'm simply looking at criteria beyond that. So I want to look for, we were already looking for our female customers who are interested in women's products, also interested in hiking, and that were part of our social channel. That's who our audience was. So we're now looking at building on and specifying more completely from there. And so the way that we're going to do this is we're going to look at our first audience here. We're going to use the e-commerce package of dimensions, and we're going to look for this under our order details. So where did they make their order? In this case, we're looking for all of our online purchasers. And so I'm going to go ahead and just name this segment online purchasers, online orders. And you'll notice I don't get a segment count here until I click refresh. And you'll notice it's running through the filter of the exclusions. If you watch the top of the screen here, it's going to be running through this. So the more segments I create, it's got to process each of those. So we can see that our segment count here is 5,168 people from within our larger audience. So I'm going to go back to all segments. And I'm going to go ahead and click create new segment here. And this is going to create segment 2. And I want them to be my in-store customers. So I'm going to say in-store purchasers. And I can click refresh here. And you'll notice as we're doing this, so if you had multiple criteria within these groupings, I could copy that criteria for another segment. I can also delete my segments from right here. This is that running totals button that we were talking about. So currently, it didn't pull it out here. It's still in the process of running this, that's why. But we'll be able to see some numbers. So we can see we have 6% of our population with that previous segment. And we can see right here we have our, we're at a total of 9,476 when we look at this segment in combination with our previously defined segment, and we see our running total or our remainder right here at the bottom. So if I go back to all segments now, notice that I can see online orders versus in-store purchasers. So this is looking for those who have previously purchased most recently. And then we're assuming here with our remainder that these are all audience members who maybe they haven't made a purchase, but they're part of our email program. Okay, so if I want to create one more segment, and let's say, so those were all the criteria that we had based on their channels. So maybe we want to pull in all those customers who haven't made a purchase in a while. So I'm going to go back up to e-commerce, but this time I'm going to go into the customer metrics limited grouping, and I'm going to go into this grouping for date of last purchase. So I'm going to click a new segment this time, and I'm going to look for maybe customers who haven't made a purchase in 10 months, to 12 months or more than 13 months. I'm looking for those who have been really unengaged. And notice it set the operator here to or by default because they couldn't be in both groupings. So I'm going to say no purchases in last 10 months. Okay. And so this might actually be a grouping that I'm going to use frequently. So I'm going to come here in just a moment after I refresh that, and I'm going to go under that advanced options tab. So keep in mind we can keep an eye on our running totals here. So we know from our previous two segments what we had there, and it's still in the process of refreshing those totals. So that what we see in that blue bar there, we can tell is going to be where this segment is going to populate. And so indeed it pulled out for us. It's saying that there's no one here, right? So maybe they didn't have, but we're essentially, if we go back to all segments, and I'll come back to that options tab in just a moment. If you notice, they already had to have the online or the in-store purchases. This is what I was talking about a moment ago with priority. So I want to reevaluate that priority. So I'm going to drag and drop those purchases up to the top, and I'm going to click refresh counts, because now it's saying, hey, look for those who haven't made a purchase before we're looking to see those who made purchases online and in store. And indeed, now we have 9,472 people that we've pulled out versus the 3 who were online orders, or the 1% that were in-store purchasers. So indeed, we had people who met multiple criteria here. But the placement and the priority is going to affect that. So if I, change this around instead and have in-store purchases and online orders and refresh those counts. So this is my point in showing you this, is that your numbers can be greatly impacted by the order of creation and whether or not we have crossover in the segments that we're creating. They are already within the audience. So, I could, maybe it doesn't make sense to leave the no purchases in the last 10 months, and instead, maybe I want for these to be a combination of those. So now if I go back to my e-commerce segment and I go into those order details, if I look at the channel, maybe I actually need to do some segmentation here. So I need them to be my online customers, and they haven't had a purchase within that amount of time. So here, if I do include, let's just see what the include count does here. Now keep in mind, as long as this is in my third tier, I'm still going to have 0 here. Because if they've fallen into the previous 2 buckets, I'm still going to see a count of 0. So what I need to do, really, is to drag this guy up here and now refresh those counts. And one of the things that's beneficial about Audience Builder is that this gives us the ability to get those counts and make sure we're getting the sampling size of the audience that we're looking for before we ever publish it. When we publish this audience, as you'll see in a few minutes, it's going to publish as a data extension that then we can use for our targeting within. So notice when I combined that with in-store orders, I'm getting a much larger number here than I was getting before. So if I change that with I can adjust the name here and say no online purchases in the last 10 months and click done. And now maybe I'm going to delete this guy off because I already know that it's going to be absorbed into this one. But then maybe I am going to change this one to be no in-store purchases in 10 or in last 10 months. So now I'm going to go back up to that order details. Actually, I think I was under customer metrics, wasn't it? Yeah, date of last purchase. And I'm going to say 10 or 13 here. But then I think we had, if I can reorder these if I need to. Right? So if I wanted this to be an include on the outside and I refresh that count, so by making this an include, essentially I'm already saying that they have to meet this criteria, right? The last purchase date and the order by channel. So now when I look back at all my segments, I'm looking at similar groupings, but the numbers have changed because of that purchasing criteria. All right, so let's say that these are going to become frequently used segments, not considering the audience criteria, but let's go out in a broader scope. So if I go here under the Advanced Options tab, now I can say that this is no online orders in last 10 months or more. And if I wanted to limit the segment size here, I could put this down by number of contacts or a percentage of my audience, but I don't, or a percentage of my segment, I should say. I don't. I'm going to leave this as just a segment code. So I'm going to click Create Template here. And it's going to take the name of the segment code to create that template. So I'm going to say Create. And when it's done here, we're going to see that segment template appear over here in this sidebar. So I could actually either do that by name or filter out just to mine. So here's mine right there. And I could sort that by name. So we can see that the larger portion of this is actually going to be, if I look at that outside of my audience, just with raw numbers, then this would actually apply to over 2 million people. Okay, so I'm going to go back to all segments again, and I'm going to do the same thing for my in-store purchasers. So coming in here, coming under the Advanced Options tab, and notice it just remembered I was under the Advanced Options tab in my other segment. So I'm going to say no in store, and I'm going to actually take that hyphen out. Purchasers in the last 10 months. Okay, so once again, I'm going to create that template. Yes, that's fine. Go ahead and hit create. It's going to take just a moment to refresh that. And then it's going to populate over here as well. So to get back to my template library, I can just collapse that and it's going to move back to that sidebar over on the left-hand panel. All right, so once I'm done getting my segments all finished, if I click done and I go back here and I review, so I'm prioritizing my online purchases over my in-store purchasers who I haven't targeted in a while. Of course, we're still looking at those social customers who are also female and interested in hiking. When I'm ready to output this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate into the Publish tab. So let's go ahead and talk about publishing audiences. When we are publishing an audience, it's going to essentially bring that data out of Data Audience Builder, which is our data warehouse, and it's going to publish it as a data extension. So when we get to this Publishing tab, it's going to largely be a form where we're going to define the data extension folder where we want that audience to be published. We're going to be able to define what our save behavior is, a tracking code. If we want to have this audience publish on a recurring basis, then we can, essentially have it marked to publish as a create activity. But one of the most important things to note is that there's a very important checkbox here at the bottom that says publish audience for each segment. If you wanted each of the two segments that we just talked about and the remainder to all be separate data extensions for targeting messages to, then we have to select that checkbox that says publish audience for each segment. Otherwise, they're all going to be included in one data extension. So, if we're not going to do separate data extensions, it really doesn't make sense to do the segments unless you just want to have a point for a notion of how many people were in each subgrouping. Most of the time when there are segments created, people will click that publish audience for each segment. Okay. All right, so one thing that we're not going to be able to see in my demo account, and that's because I don't have the permissions enabled, is that there is a capability of appending attributes. So when those data extensions publish, they are going to have bare bones information that is fixed on those columns, and those what columns of data publish out is going to be custom to your individual customer. However, typically it is not like a regular data extension where we'd have their name and, we'll have their email address usually or their customer ID number. But a lot of the time we don't have a lot of other information about them like we would on a regular data extension, like what city they're from, what state they're from, etc. So that's where appending data comes in. So we can create a set of data that's been housed within the Audience Builder platform and available for us to select. So this is going to be one of those places where you as instructors are going to find yourselves customizing and providing some instruction to your end users about what data to publish under which circumstances. So, for example, I had a customer who was using Audience Builder to also publish audiences for direct mail as well as for email. So when it was a direct mail audience, they had a specific set that they would go to make sure that they were selecting to add the columns so that it would display the values for, their name, their street address, their second line of street address, their city, their state, and their postal code. So that's really what appending attributes will do, is it's adding a column of data to the published data extension, and so that way we can have that data there for personalization, but also if they are going to export that data extension from the application for something that data is still available. Okay, so important point there is that you can't add more than 10 columns of published data. When we create an attribute set, it's essentially allowing you to select the attribute grouping and then pick which attributes are available. And you'll notice here on this slide that there's a black box over that. This is where you would update this slide with a screenshot of what specifically is in your customer's account. Okay, and then finally, as you pick those attributes, you're going to see there which ones are coming on, and they're going to appear on the table in the order that you select them. All right. So when we are getting ready to publish, you're going to see a publish preview option. What that will do is it will take a few minutes to render on screen, but what it's going to show you is your subscriber key, your segment code, your tracking code, the information that you've defined about your customers as a data extension. So before you're even creating the data extension in your account, you get the sense to make sure, yes, this is what I'm looking for and this is what the data is going to look like. It's particularly helpful if you are appending data to make sure that those columns do in fact contain the values that you're expecting. Okay, you can search for a particular subscriber by a comma if you'd like to, and you could search for up to 10 different subscribers based on their subscriber key. Okay, like I said, this is another one of those elements that I don't believe I'm going to have access to in this demo org that I'm in. So let's go ahead and jump in here under the Publish tab. And over on the left hand side, notice it says that it's not published, and I could put in email addresses to let me know when this audience is available. So I could just go ahead and put in my email address there and click done. Okay, so under the audience type tab, this is where I'm specifying this is going to be email. My save location is going to be data extensions under audiences. So I have the ability to select other folders here or create a new folder. And then I can see the tracking code has populated based on the name of my audience. I can adjust this if I wish. I'm going to leave that as it is. I skipped right past save behavior. So right now it's saying override existing records. So if I automate this, or if I come in and refresh this later, it will essentially replace the records who are currently meeting the criteria when it reruns with anybody who meets new criteria. Most of the time with audiences, we use we overwrite. But notice you do have the ability to save it out as a new audience as well. So if you're going to keep repurposing it, then that's really important. And this is going to just tell you some basic details, like that audiences have a 6-month retention period. So basically, if they haven't been used, then the system's going to auto delete those audiences. Okay. So as we come through here, I'm going to click Create Publish Activity, because that's going to allow me to create an activity in automation, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. As I come down, notice it says segments to be published, and I can see each of these. So in total, I would be, if I don't select this checkbox here, I'm only going to publish one data extension with 82,611 records. If I select this checkbox now, this will be a data extension, and this will be a data extension, and this will be a data extension. All right, as I continue through here, this is where I don't have the ability to create a set, but what I could essentially do is I would be able to select which personalization attributes I want to add, and then these would be the ones that append to my column. So my NTO balance, my Facebook friends, my preferred store, and my age. Okay, I can't do anything to adjust that on this screen, unfortunately. But that's where I said when you are in a customer's account, that ideally that's what we want to do. Pardon me. So I'm going to click Publish Preview. And notice it's going to look just like it's getting ready to run through all of these items here for us. So it's running the filter and the exclusions and the segments, but it's really in the background generating a preview of what that final data extension is going to look like. All right, so we're just waiting for that to pop up on screen here. And I'm hoping it's not a permissions issue. Ordinarily, it'd be just a window that pops up to display. And perhaps my account is not displaying correctly. Normally, it's just going to be a pop-up window that's going to show, oh, it's still running. I got ahead of myself here. Still running those exclusions. So typically when you're here under the Publish tab and we're talking about attributes to be appended, that is something that we want to be very clear with our customer about when we are talking through those use cases. So once their Audience Builder implementation is done, it is a great idea to have them walk you through and do a call that's specifically focused on Audience Builder to talk about what segments or what audiences are we building. Are we building segments for those audiences? If not, that's fine. When we're publishing, what are the criteria of what attributes we should append in which circumstances? All right, so here we have, we can search for our audience based on subscriber keys. And here we should see we don't have any purchasers in the last 10 months, which is, it may still be rendering on screen. But we can see here, if we look at the no in-store purchases in the last 10 months, that we have 4,307 records, and we're just getting a little snapshot of what that looks like. So indeed, these are the columns that are appending to our data extension. If you look at what populates our subscriber key, our segment code, and our tracking code, those are all based on those names that we give that we identify in our audience and in our segment when we are defining those. So it really comes in to be important here simply because it's going to show on the data extension as that. Otherwise, it's going to be a very blanket statement of like, segment 1, for example, which isn't very helpful. So we can actually see on this data extension, which grouping were they a part of? Okay. All right, so if we want to click expand all, that gives you the ability to see all of them and just scroll through. Okay, if I wanted to search within a particular data extension, I won't be in here. So it doesn't make sense for me to try and search by subscriber key. So I'm going to go ahead and hit X here. And because I selected this checkbox up here to create the publish activity, I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I'm done for now. So when we talk about selecting that checkbox to create a publish activity, what that is going to correspond to is automating our audience builder activities. So generally we're going to work in audience builder to create our audience or our segments or both. Then we're going to check that checkbox when we are publishing. We are then going to have to create an activity definition that lives in the email application under the interactions tab. When we create that activity definition, that's something that then we can use in an automation in Automation Studio. So essentially we have three different activities that are going to be available to us. We can refresh a segment template. So you just saw me save those templates a moment ago. We can publish an audience, which is what aligns to that checkbox that you just saw, or we can verify an audience count. It's going to refresh the count of an audience by reapplying those rules. Okay, so when we go through here, we're going to navigate through the email under interactions, and then at the bottom we're going to see refresh counts, build audience, and count audience. Then we're going to navigate into Automation Studio, create a new automation, and drag on our respective counts. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to go ahead and open here in a new tab. And I'm going to go to mc.exacttarget.com. It's going to redirect me to my my default page within my Marketing Cloud account. Okay, so I need to go into Email Studio. So I'm going to come here under Email. And here under Interactions, I want to build that audience. And it's taking just a moment to reload here. So here you'll notice I don't have the permissions to create a new audience, but when I did, I'm just going to click in and show you what this is going to look like. So if I click in on this sheet, it's really just naming the audience and then selecting the audience that was defined within the application. Right? So I need to know the name of this audience in order to bring that into an activity. So then I would go into Automation Studio under the Journey Builder menu. And I don't have permissions here to create an audience, but what I would essentially be able to do is then drag that onto my canvas to be able to include. So if we look here, I think this one looks like it's got an audience as an activity. Go into the workflow steps. Nope, that's a group refresh. But essentially what you're going to see is the publish audience icon here. And if I were to drag that on, and it's going to tell me I don't have permissions, but essentially if I publish audience, then I'm going to pick the definition that I created under interactions, and it's essentially going to execute that. So it's going to create that data extension the first time. The second time I run this automation, it's going to continually update that same data extension, right? Unfortunately, I don't have an account that has full capabilities. That's a demo. But that's all there is to Audience Builder from a high level, and hopefully this session has been very helpful to provide some familiarity on Audience Builder and how we train on it.